we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
All right, I know this is not a standard Tuesday release, but I'm doing an extra show this week. I have been repeatedly asked if I'm going to talk about this new film, The Sound of Freedom. It is starring Jim Caviezel, best known as Jesus, in the Mel Gibson movie The Passion of the Christ, a guy who's just gone off the rails with a number of wacky conspiracy theories, and I'm going to get into that. He's playing the character of a guy named Tim Ballard, who goes out and rescues the victims of child sex trafficking. And I guess as a work of fiction, or played as a movie thriller, it is well done. It's well reviewed, and it's making crazy box office. $18 million its first weekend. It debuted just behind Indiana Jones and Insidious. I mean, for this indie movie, produced by Angel Studios, right? Seemed to come out of nowhere. I've seen billboards everywhere for it, and it is doing massive business. Over $40 million gross in the first 5 days, and it is the darling of American conservatives. The on-screen story of Tim Ballard. This is kind of a fictionalized version of what is supposed to be a true story, a real-life story. A former government agent is rescuing child victims all around the world. Jim Caviezel plays the lead. Tim Ballard, the character, is a real-life guy. He is a former Homeland Security agent, and back in 2013, he founded Operation Underground Railroad, or OUR. And this organization apparently conducts sting operations around the world to rescue kids from sex traffickers. And Tim Ballard has been featured on media everywhere, from ESPN to Fox News and print. And he was actually appointed to an anti-trafficking advisory position by Donald Trump during the Trump administration. But already, if we look into Tim Ballard, things start to get really sticky. Investigators have looked into Operation Underground Railroad, OUR, and they are worried that most of the organization's claims have been pretty much impossible to fact-check. So they come forward with all of these heroic tales of running in and grabbing the kids and whisking them out to safety and helping them to rehabilitate. They might be true, but unfortunately there's no way to verify if they are true. The practices are not known. The success stories cannot be vetted or verified. Many people are suspicious that OUR is actually building an image, right? Tim Ballard, hero, legend, is sort of building his legacy on an organization. And so they go in, make up stories, exaggerate stories. What's going on there? We certainly don't know, but there's reason to be genuinely suspicious. And of course, the second you begin to ask questions, critics who are emotionally charged, and it's understandable, over this legitimate, horrifying human rights nightmare, child sex trafficking. Yes, it happens. Yes, it's rampant. Yes, we must be made aware. In that context, I actually think a movie like Sound of Freedom is a good idea. But here's the thing. If you start to ask questions about this specific film, who's behind the scenes? Is there a subtext that is linked to a bunch of different conspiracies and stories that aren't rooted in the data? Is this problematic, right? Is this something that is not sound, wearing the veneer of a legitimate problem in this world? child sex trafficking. If you stop, for many people, if you stop and start to ask these types of questions, they will turn on you. Who could ever criticize a film that is ringing the alarm bell against child sex traffickers? Are you yourself a pedophile? I've seen this already on Twitter. Hey, pedo, why in the world would you ever criticize this wonderful, noble message? And this is really sticky because I think it's important to understand what's going on under the hood. Who are these people? Investigators have looked in to Operation Underground Railroad. They are hearing stories that aren't really true. Here's an example. There was the story of a victim. She goes by the name Liliana. And when she was 14 years old in Mexico, she was wooed and taken in by this man, this older man. And he introduced her to his family, and he said he loved her, and she was totally smitten, right? He seduced this child as her boyfriend, and then they got into the United States from Mexico. And as soon as they crossed the border and got a house, the man turned on her. The house had bars on the windows. He locked her inside and sold her as a sex slave for 3 years until Liliana finally escaped. But she got out on her own. She actually escaped the house and sped away in a cab. She did this all on her own. And yet OUR has claimed that it was heavily involved in her rescue. Tim Ballard was on Fox News. He did an op-ed in 2019 where he said this, quote, "The private anti-trafficking organization I founded over 5 years ago, Operation Underground Railroad, eventually helped Liliana escape her hell." Tim Ballard told the same story 3 days later at a big Trump White House event. And he actually changed the details. He lowered her age from 14 to 11. He embellished the story that she had been groomed by her seducer for 2 full years. The court documents say nothing about anything like that. There were no details like that. Apparently, he just added those in. He used her story to campaign for the Trump border wall. The idea was, if Trump's wall had been there, Liliana's abductor would have had to get her through legitimate entry points at the border, and she could have been saved. There's another story about an OUR operative. This woman was said to have wrestled away a golden padlock from an abductor. So the abductor had grabbed a child and was whisking it off to be locked in a prison or a room with bars and locks on the doors. And this brave woman went in and battled the attacker and wrestled away the padlock and rescued the children. This story was told by Tim Ballard in front of a live audience. The audience went crazy. The media lapped it up. The story has never been verified. At the event, he actually pulled the golden padlock out of his pocket and he held it up in front of the audience, and he said, "This is the actual padlock that was going to imprison the children, and our brave operative wrestled it away." No evidence for any of this, right? But the golden padlock, man, it's a great story, and people lap that stuff up. And then some people are protesting that OUR is misleading donors. And there were some tax filings from 2018 that were closely examined. $2,700,000 plus were said to have been used to assist law enforcement in freeing sex slaves and providing aftercare for victims in North Africa and the Middle East. The descriptions were vague and broad, and many of the law enforcement organizations in question say they don't really work much at all with OUR. Instead of being side by side and shoulder to shoulder, it looks like many of these organizations may have just grazed by them along the way. Other reputable child advocacy and aftercare organizations say they don't even know who OUR is. Public records requests to New York State's Office of Victim Services returned 0 documents mentioning Tim Ballard's organization. The United States Department of Criminal Justice Services could not confirm any elements of his claims, and they said that the office had no relationship with OUR. The state-funded Response to Human Trafficking program said they didn't even know who this organization was. And finally, if there is a child trafficking rescue case in the United States, the Office of Refugee Resettlement is almost always involved in the safekeeping and the relocation of survivors. The U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants would also likely be involved. The Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families would probably be involved. These organizations say they have no relationship with OUR. It's not connected at all to a leading anti-trafficking coalition called the Freedom Network USA. Again, this is a coalition. This is an organization, a gathering, a connecting of child advocacy groups nationwide. Freedom Network USA said, we don't work with these people. Tim Ballard's organization, his multi-million-dollar organization, is apparently operating largely on its own with big claims and hidden checkbooks. There is reason to be suspicious. Beyond that, Tim Ballard is a conspiracy theorist. And oh, look, he is played on screen in The Sound of Freedom by another conspiracy theorist, the actor Jim Caviezel. And we know Jim Caviezel because he played Jesus in a lucrative movie called The Passion of the Christ, which was directed by another conspiracy theorist, Mel Gibson. Now, I'm talking about the players, the producers, the gears in the machine. I was going to try to describe everything in more detail, but since I haven't actually seen the film, right, I'm going to wait. I'm not going to buy a ticket. I'm going to wait and stream it. I wanted to read for you an article by someone who has seen the film. Miles Klee wrote a July 7th article for Rolling Stone. I'm just going to read the whole thing for you here. Obligatory spoiler alert, in case you want to be surprised when you see the film. And here we go. The article is titled, Sound of Freedom is a superhero movie for dads with brainworms. The article says this: based on a true story I heard from somewhere across the theater. The familiar words had appeared on screen, and an elderly man had taken it upon himself to read them aloud to the rest of a sizable audience seated for a matinee showing of the anti-child trafficking thriller Sound of Freedom starring Jim Caviezel. For the seasoned moviegoer, this phrase is a joke. We know that cinema will stretch almost any truth to the breaking point, and the rank insincerity of such a pronouncement is the foundation of the prankish opening titles of Fargo. But this crowd, I could tell, would view the events depicted over the next 2+ hours as entirely literal. Caviezel, best known for being tortured to death in Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, has become a prominent figure on the conspiracist right, giving speeches and interviews in which he hints at an underground holy war between patriots and a sinister legion of evildoers who are harvesting the blood of children. It's straight-up QAnon stuff, right down to his use of catchphrases like, "The storm is upon us." Here, he gets to act out some of that drama by playing a fictionalized version of Tim Ballard, head of the anti-sex trafficking nonprofit Operation Underground Railroad, in a feature film that cast the operator as a Batman-style savior for kids sold into the sex trade. Ballard himself has dabbled in Q-adjacent conspiracy theories, such as the Wayfair trafficking hoax. By the way, I got to stop here. Wayfair is a furniture retailer. And Tim Ballard once said that he suspected that Wayfair was involved in the trafficking of children when they weren't selling furniture. Okay. While his organization has far-right affinities and a long record of distorting its botched, quote-unquote, raids, which rely on bizarre tactics like asking psychics where to find victims for rescue, Ballard, Caviezel, and others of their ilk had primed the public to accept Sound of Freedom as a documentary rather than delusion by fomenting moral panic for years over this grossly exaggerated epidemic of child sex trafficking, much of it funneling people into conspiracist rabbit holes and QAnon communities. In short, I was at the movies with people who were there to see their worst fears confirmed. Sound of Freedom lives up to that anticipation. It's a stomach-turning experience, fetishizing the torture of its child victims and lingering over lush preludes to their sexual abuse. At times, I had the uncomfortable sense that I might be arrested myself just for sitting through it. Nonetheless, the mostly white-haired audience around me could be relied on to gasp, moan in pity, mutter condemnations, applaud and bellow "Amen" at moments of righteous fury, as when Ballard declares that, quote, "God's children are not for sale." They were entranced by what they clearly took for a searing expose, not even the occasional nasty coughing fit, and we had no shortage of those, could break the spell. At the outset, we were introduced to Caviezel as Ballard, working for the Department of Homeland Security as part of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. He takes down purveyors of child pornography, but is haunted by the knowledge that the actual victims are beyond his grasp. Meanwhile, a father in Honduras entrusts his young daughter and son to a woman who claims she can set them up with modeling careers, only to abduct them for transport to a child sex trafficking ring in Colombia. When Ballard takes the initiative of arranging his first sting to nab a pedophile who has a stolen child in tow, he conveniently ends up rescuing that little boy and commits to finding the sister as well. Eventually, he'll abandon the DHS altogether, a rogue crusader fed up with bureaucratic limitations to infiltrate and bring down the Colombian operation. Apart from its relentless messaging, the movie is hobbled by a near-total absence of procedural logic. That original rescue is only possible because Ballard is standing at the exact right spot of a U.S.-Mexico border station at the very moment his target tries to cross. Lucky! Earlier, Ballard convinces an imprisoned child porn peddler facing a sentence of 30 years to help him contact traffickers in exchange for an immunity deal, needlessly posing as a pedophile himself to gain trust. When the guy fulfills his end of the bargain, Ballard has a dozen police officers swarm the diner they're in to arrest him again? Wait, how was he sprung from custody in the first place? Doesn't matter, as long as the drooling creep with requisite glasses and pervert mustache gets his head slammed against a table once more. The same muddled approach is taken to Ballard's later, more sensational busts, which is certainly in keeping with the way OUR embellishes and misrepresents their internal missions, according to a Vice News investigation of the group. Then you have Caviezel, bleached blonde to match Ballard's buff, clean-cut Mormon profile. Performance-wise, he's stuck on a note of world historical grief, either crying or staring with bloodshot eyes as he attempts to convey the scale and weight of the tragedy before him. The unambiguous hero of the piece, Ballard invokes parenthood as his motivation, or an argument to get the cooperation he wants. Quote, "What if it was your daughter?" is practically his catchphrase. Yet aside from a dialogue-free breakfast scene, he never interacts with his offspring. And if Mira Sorvino, who plays his wife Catherine, spent more than a day on set, you'd never know it. She's there for all of 2 minutes, offering brief words of encouragement, while Ballard spends weeks undercover as a louche sex tourist in Central America. She, too, evidently had a personal stake in joining this film, telling the Washington Examiner this week that she has, quote, "met so many child survivors, and my heart burns for them." As implausible as the movie is, It invents a finale where Ballard journeys deep into a jungle alone to pluck a girl from the clutches of guerrilla militants, which he accomplishes by posing as a doctor distributing cholera vaccines. One wonders if it was extreme enough for Caviezel's liking. The actor has taken to repeating the most grotesque falsehoods of the sprawling QAnon ideology. Among them, that traffickers are harvesting children's organs and extracting the chemical compound adrenochrome from their brains before murdering them. Compared to this nonsense, Sound of Freedom is relatively grounded in our universe. But that mainstream accessibility makes it valuable as a recruitment tool, much as generic Save the Children campaigns proved gateways to far-right conspiracy theories about a secret cabal of evil elites conducting blood rituals. On the QAnon message board Great Awakening this week, adherents celebrated the movie's box office success, while crowing that demons, including movie theater employees annoyed by the demographic it pulled in, were miserable at their victory. "Do you see how more powerful we are than the legacy news?" wrote one board user. "We are the news now." On a different thread, someone attempted to prove that Donald Trump's endorsement of the film on Truth Social was connected to a random Q post from 2018. Some discussed efforts to get normies who are in need of awakening to see Sound of Freedom, including with the assistance of a promotional program that allows customers to buy tickets for strangers. Quote, "Crimes against children will unite us all. Eyes are opening," read one optimistic post, while another was more emphatic still. "We are witnessing true divine intervention." It matters, too, that Sound of Freedom almost never saw the light of day. Completed in 2018, no studio would take it for fear of losing money, according to the producer, with Netflix and Amazon among those who passed. It finally found distribution thanks to Angel Studios, a Utah-based media company that crowdfunds original films and TV series that, quote, amplify light. Although founded by Mormon brothers who originally created a content filtering service to prevent children from seeing violence, nudity, and profanity, it claims no formal church affiliation. Therefore, to its boosters, the movie checks many satisfying boxes at once. Caviezel, a devout Catholic, allegedly blacklisted by the entertainment industry, back for a mythology-burnishing biopic of Ballard. A call to action in an imagined global war against sexual predators. A blow struck at the heart of woke Hollywood, the den of iniquity that snubbed it, and lest we forget, is thought to produce the wealthy deviants who serve as villains in this story. Meaning it will surely do no good to point out Sound of Freedom's hackney white savior narrative or its wildly immature assumption that abused and traumatized children go right back to normal once the bad guys are in handcuffs, or that it enforces stereotypes about trafficking that Angel Studios itself says are less than accurate. To the film's intended viewers, these cannot be flaws. They're the whole appeal. There is visible suffering all around us in America. There are poor and unhoused and people brutalized or killed by police. There are mass shootings, lack of health care, climate disasters. And yet, over and over, the far right turns to those sordid fantasies about godless monsters hurting children. Now, as in the 1980s satanic panic, they won't even face the fact that most kids who suffer sexual abuse are harmed not by a shadowy cabal of strangers, but at the hands of a family member. To know thousands of adults will absorb Sound of Freedom, this vigilante fever dream, and come away thinking themselves better informed on a hidden civilizational crisis, well, it's profoundly depressing. Worse still, they'll want to spread the word. Rolling Stone is absolutely right about Jim Caviezel being cast off. He was whining about it on the Charlie Kirk broadcast, and Charlie Kirk is another right-wing Christian nationalist crackpot bigot. And so he's on Charlie Kirk's program. Let me just play you the audio. This is the actor Jim Caviezel just a few days ago.
Adrenochrome, that's not true. It's C9H9NO3. This is a chemical compound that is absolutely listed. It's been around in modern science since the 1930s. You can actually, there's a synthetic form and there's a regular, natural form, which is caused by torturing little kids to get their adrenaline up, essentially, and then extracting it from them. When you sit and meet, and so I brought this up a few years ago, and all of a sudden I was attacked by every media. Look it up. It's there. They absolutely went after me. And the next day, I never heard from my agency for 14 months. My lawyers let me go. My agency never called me after that. And essentially I was done.
Now, I don't know about you, but I see a pattern here. Because once somebody kind of goes off the rails, right, or they become marginalized, or maybe they're just no longer bankable by Hollywood, they seem to go find a niche in this sort of right-wing, hardcore, conspiratorial, evangelical thing. I mean, look at Kevin Sorbo. Look at the films by Pure Flix as they bring in a lot of actors that may have been prominent years ago. Maybe they're sort of languishing, and all of a sudden they find a new home. They claim this religious nobility, and they are out there fighting. Perhaps they're sincere. Maybe they are just marketing. Maybe they're just like the musicians who can't make it in pop culture, and so they go find a career in the religious music industry. Christian music's always looking for opportunities to find marketable stuff that sounds like what's happening in secular radio. So the B, C, and D players and the fringe elements can go there and find a home. I think this may be what happened with Jim Caviezel. He went off the rails. Everybody said, we don't want anything to do with you. And now he has landed in a very friendly net. Now, again, you and I are in this very difficult position where we have to take a hard forensic look at a film and the agenda behind the film, one that brandishes up front a legitimate problem, a legitimate human horror. And the game is rigged so that if you and I say there may be some problems with this story, their response can be, you don't care about our children. We see this all the time as bad people weaponize legitimate issues, distort them, and then hide behind them. Trey Crowder, the comedian, the liberal redneck, he released some commentary. I think this runs 3 or 4 minutes about Sound of Freedom. And he had this to say about it.
Libs are getting owned all across the multiplex this summer as conservatives come out in droves to support The Sound of Freedom, the child sex trafficking action thriller starring renowned nutbag Jim Caviezel. The film's critics say that it's QAnon adjacent. Its supporters say that it presents a truth that the left doesn't want you to see. So let's get something straight right now, okay? Child sex trafficking is a very real issue and it's awful. Nobody but the traffickers supports it, okay? Listen, people on the right, the only reason we're not with you 100% on this issue is because you insist on salt baying everything with lunacy. Okay? That's why you just come out and say, hey, we need to do something about this child sex trafficking problem. Everybody goes, yeah, you're right, we should. Go on. And then you say, yeah, we got to stop this shadowy global cabal of elitists who use ritual sacrifice to harvest the blood of the innocent in their undying quest for immortality. And it's like, wait, what? What kind of peasant mob shit was that? Ritual sacrifice? What are you talking about? Like pagans in the bloodwood or something? It's 2023, dude. What? I'm good. You sound like you're about 2 steps away from getting out the witch burning sticks, okay? So good luck with all that, right? Like, I get it. As a parent, I'm sensitive to anything about, kids being abused or whatever, but y'all start talking about vampires, pizza, adrenochrome, and I dive out of the rabbit hole, dude, on account of how crazy that's. Do you really not realize how crazy that sounds, right? But to be fair to this movie, reportedly, it don't do none of that. The movie itself is just a standard issue action thriller with the quips to match, although I guess the quips in Sound of Freedom is stuff like, never trust a pedophile. Like, oh, thank you, Sound of Freedom. Here I was about to sign off on this Chomo's car loan, but I guess I won't now, so good looking out. The Sound of Freedom shows that if you produce a competently made film with an actual budget and real talent behind it that panders directly to the Flag and Bible Brigade, then you're off to the races, buddy. That's right, there ain't no grift like a right-wing grift, because a right-wing grift blows cops. That's right, this movie somehow makes these people feel like they are certified door-kicking, child-saving patriot heroes just for buying a ticket and eating popcorn in the dark. It's brilliant. Right? And if I know anything about how Hollywood works, its success probably means we're about to see a whole trend of forthcoming Clint Eastwood-style freedom boner extravaganza. So buckle up, film goers, because I got a feeling we're just getting started here.
Again, that's Trey Crowder, Trae Crowder. If you're not subscribed to him on social media, you should be. Okay, so that's kind of what we know. If you've seen the film and you'd like to weigh in, sound off, whatever, to defend it or warn against it or explain it better than we have here, please do so in the comments section. But at least now we have begun the conversation about the Sound of Freedom film and the agents, or at least a few of the agents behind it. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you back here next week.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming free thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.